Imagine this, you go to a restaurant for dinner with your loved one, but instead of a warm welcome, you are met with prejudice and disdain. Shocking, right? That's exactly what happened to a black couple when they were kicked out of the establishment because of their skin color. But the story doesn't end there. What if I told you that the owner of this restaurant who committed this outrageous injustice would soon regret his actions when he found out who these people really were? Stay tuned, because the ending of the story will definitely surprise you. When the couple entered the restaurant, the atmosphere changed immediately. They noticed some disgruntled looks from the customers, but they did not pay attention to it. They just wanted to have a nice evening. However, soon the owner of the establishment approached them, a man of about 50, with a cold, almost contemptuous expression on his face. Without asking any questions, he directly stated that his restaurant did not have a place for people like that. He spoke quietly, but with obvious malice, not hiding his racist attitude. The couple was shocked at first. They tried to find out what was going on, since there had been no violation on their part, but the owner was adamant, "I will not serve you. Leave now." Embarrassed and humiliated, they left the restaurant, but as she left, the woman gave him a look of calm dignity and said, "You will soon regret your decision." A week passed. The restaurant owner even forgot about the incident. He was sure that he had done the right thing and that such people should not visit his respectable establishment. However, one morning several expensive cars drove up to his restaurant. People in formal suits got out of them and headed straight towards him. One of them, apparently the main one, came up and introduced himself. It turned out that it was a delegation from a well-known corporation that owned a large chain of restaurants all over the world. "We're here to discuss your future," one of the representatives began, holding out a business card. "Our owners were impressed with your establishment and were planning to make a lucrative offer to purchase it." The restaurant owner couldn't believe his ears. This was the chance he'd dreamed of his entire life. The chain they belonged to was not only successful, but also global. "But here's the thing," the spokesman added. "The owner of the company, our CEO, was planning to discuss this in person. And who do you think that person is? The same man you fired last week. And his wife is the head of a human rights organization that fights racial discrimination." The owner's face turned pale. Memories of that day flashed before his eyes, of how arrogantly he had treated his customers. He realized that with his prejudiced attitude he had not only insulted powerful people, but had also squandered the opportunity of a lifetime. The restaurant owner froze in his tracks, realizing that his dreams had just been shattered. Scenes from that fateful evening flashed through his mind, the disparaging tone with which he had thrown out the black couple, their quiet dignity even as he pointedly refused to serve them. It was clear now, he had made a mistake that had cost him far more than a couple of dinners. "There's some mistake. Are you sure you're talking about the right person?" he muttered, trying to maintain his composure. The corporate representative looked at him with cold confidence and replied, "We're not mistaken. These people are our owners. They rarely visit such establishments in person, but they wanted to remain anonymous that night, and that's how you treated them." The restaurant owner's stomach sank. He tried to justify himself, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain such behavior? In fact, there was no justification. The next moment, the representative added, "And that's not all. Thanks to the efforts of their human rights organization, the incident attracted the attention of the media. You may not know it, but one of the customers filmed you throwing them out. And tomorrow, this story could be the headline of all the news." Upon hearing this, the restaurant owner realized that the situation had gotten out of control. He rushed to his computer, opened news sites and social networks. Sure enough, a video taken by one of the customers went viral. The comments below were seething with anger. People called him a racist, demanded a boycott of his restaurant, and some suggested closing the place down altogether. His restaurant's online ratings plummeted, and customers began canceling their reservations. In desperation, the owner tried to contact lawyers, but all the advice boiled down to one thing: an apology. He needed to make a public apology and try to save his reputation before it was too late. The next day, he held a press conference. With tears in his eyes, he repented on camera, explaining his behavior as stress and promising to reconsider his views. He announced that he would donate money to charity and even offered free dinners for those who had suffered discrimination. But the real problem was not his words, but his actions. By the time he tried to save his reputation, it was too late. The couple he had kicked out came forward and said that an apology was not enough. They intended to sue the owner and his restaurant for racial discrimination and emotional distress. Months passed and the legal battle dragged on. The restaurant's reputation was irreparably damaged. Locals and tourists avoided it, and popular restaurant guides removed it from their lists. Eventually, the restaurant was forced to close, unable to withstand the financial pressure and public boycott. But the story doesn't end there. The couple who were once humiliated by the restaurant owner ended up buying the building at auction after it went bankrupt. They transformed it into a community center that hosted events to combat racial injustice and promote equality. The center became a symbol of how hatred and prejudice can be overcome through justice and love. The owner of the restaurant, once successful and proud, was left with nothing. He lost his business, his reputation, and his respect. This incident changed his life forever, becoming a reminder that hatred always has consequences, and respect for others is the basis of success, be it in a restaurant or in life. Years passed and the former restaurant owner, who had lost everything because of one fateful day, found himself on the brink of despair. His restaurant had once been successful and he himself had been a respected businessman, but now, without business and respect, he was barely making ends meet. He had fired all his employees, sold his property, and was now living in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. Everything he had built had collapsed in a matter of days. Inside, he was tormented by bitterness and a sense of injustice, but looking back, he began to understand that he himself had been the cause of his own downfall. Gradually, he began to realize that his biased views and actions had become his own shackles. Thinking back to the moment he kicked out the black couple, he realized that he had not only offended people, but had demonstrated deeply ingrained stereotypes that had ruined his life. At first, he had a hard time accepting this realization, but every time he passed the former restaurant-turned-community center, the feeling of shame grew. One day, he decided to look inside the center, overcoming his fear and embarrassment. When he entered, he was overcome by a wonderful feeling. The center was full of life. People of different nationalities and cultures sat at tables, discussing ideas, organizing events, and helping each other. The atmosphere of kindness and unity was in sharp contrast to the arrogant and cold attitude he had once demonstrated in his establishment. In the midst of one of the events taking place in the center, a familiar figure caught his eye. It was the same couple he had kicked out a few years ago. The man and woman stood on the stage and spoke to the crowd, telling their story of fighting racism and discrimination. He recognized them as the people who had caused his downfall. But now, instead of anger, something new arose inside him, a sense of guilt and a desire to correct his mistakes. He watched them perform, feeling small and insignificant in this new world being built by those he once despised. After the event, he gathered his courage and approached them. The man and woman recognized him immediately, and the air was tense. He expected judgment, maybe even ridicule, but what happened next shocked him. "I don't know how to apologize," he said, his voice shaking. "I destroyed everything, but I see that you have created something much greater. I came here not to justify myself, but to ask for forgiveness. Your example has changed me." There was a moment of silence. The man and woman looked at each other, and then the woman stepped forward. "Forgiveness is the first step to healing. We hold no grudge against you. What happened was a lesson for all of us. You made the wrong choice then, but you chose the right path today by coming here." He couldn't believe his ears. Their generosity was overwhelming. This moment was a turning point for him. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Not all was lost. After that day, he began visiting the center regularly. At first, he just watched, and then he began participating in their programs. He attended seminars, read books about racial prejudice and discrimination, and tried to understand how his own beliefs had been formed and how they could be changed. He realized that his path to redemption would be long, but he was ready for it. Over time, he gained the trust of the center's participants. He became a volunteer, helping to organize events and support those who had suffered injustice. His past was no longer just a burden to him, but an important lesson he shared with others. He told his story openly, admitting his mistakes to warn others about the consequences of bias. A few years passed, and the man who was once a symbol of hatred and intolerance became an important part of the movement for equality and justice. The couple he kicked out became his friends and mentors, helping him on his path to change. Together, they organized community projects, drawing attention to the problems of discrimination, and showed that even the deepest wounds can be healed if there is a desire to change. The story of the former restaurateur became an example of how people are capable of change if they are ready to admit their mistakes and work on themselves. His life became a symbol of the fact that it is never too late to start over, find forgiveness and build a better future, both for yourself and for those around you. It had been several years since the former restaurant owner became active in a community center dedicated to fighting discrimination. He had been working honestly to change himself, share his story, help people who had suffered from injustice, and build a new life. However, one unexpected evening became a turning point for him, causing him to question the sincerity of his changes. One day, a luxury car pulled up to the center. An elderly man with a cane and a stern expression stepped out. The former restaurant owner turned pale as soon as he looked at him. It was his father, a man he had not spoken to for many years. A father whose racist views may have been the reason for the convictions that had once led him to the shameful incident. Despite his age and physical weakness, his presence was still overwhelming. "So this is where you hide now," said the father, looking around the center with obvious disdain. "You, my son, have become a lackey to those we have always despised." The words cut the former restaurant owner like a knife. Long forgotten emotions flared up: fear, the desire to please his father, and, worst of all, deep prejudices he thought he had overcome. He felt something inside him break. In that moment, he realized that his changes had been superficial. He had changed only because he wanted to atone for his guilt, but he had not completely rid himself of the roots of hatred that had taken root in his childhood. The father continued to say, "You were always proud to own this city, to do business with decent people, and now you stand among them and beg for forgiveness? You have brought shame on our family." The words stirred up old fears in him. Once he had strived to be successful, to prove his worth to his father. But now, faced with the man who had instilled in him all the prejudices he had tried so hard to overcome, his inner world was shaken. "I have changed," he said quietly, but with a tremor in his voice, although he himself was not sure that he fully believed these words. "Changed?" Father smirked. "You just buckled under pressure. You were always a weakling." The words stuck in his mind like poisonous arrows. Doubts he had long since suppressed suddenly surfaced. He began to wonder if his atonement was genuine, or if he was simply trying to find a new place in society to avoid judgment. Perhaps he was merely wearing a mask of change, while his inner convictions were still influenced by his father. The father turned to leave, saying one last thing: "You can pretend that you have become different, but inside you will always remain the same as I raised you." At that moment, the couple who had changed his life walked into the room. They noticed the tension on his face and came over to ask if everything was okay. He felt the past and present colliding inside him, like two opposing forces. How could he admit to these people that he was still struggling with the very demons they had helped him exorcise? "Yeah, it's okay," he managed to say, but he could feel his voice shaking. He didn't know what would happen next. Should he stick to the path he had chosen, or let his old fears take over again? The internal struggle was heating up. He realized that change is not a one-time act, but a constant struggle, and now he was on the brink: either retreat or continue on this path to true change, even if it was the hardest decision of his life. That night, he couldn't sleep. His father's words echoed in his head like poison. Everything he'd worked so hard to build, his new life, his redemption, his trust, now seemed as fragile as a house of cards, ready to crumble at the slightest breeze. He doubted himself, his motives, even whether he'd truly changed. What if his father was right, and inside he was still the same man who'd thrown the couple out of the restaurant? The next day he returned to the center with a heavy heart. He wanted to leave, to abandon everything he had started, and to return to his usual state of resentment and rejection. But when he entered, he encountered people who had become a symbol of change for him. The same couple who had once suffered injustice at his hands were working on a new project to combat racial discrimination. They were deep in discussion with other members of the center, but when they saw him, they smiled warmly. Their friendliness and openness seemed even more unbearable to him, because he could not shake the feeling that he had betrayed their trust in his thoughts. He decided to come up and, gathering all his will, said, "We need to talk." They invited him to sit down. Sensing that something was wrong with him, he searched for words for a long time, and finally said, "My father came to see me yesterday. He said things that made me think about who I really am. I'm afraid that all this time I've been trying to convince myself that I've changed, but maybe deep down I'm still the same person." The couple listened intently, without interrupting. Finally, the man, A former company executive who had once been the victim of his racist act responded, "You know that genuine change is not a path without mistakes. You have done a lot to change your life, but to expect it all to disappear in an instant is an illusion." His wife added, "You can't completely get rid of the past, but you can choose how to deal with it. Forgiveness and working on yourself is a process that takes time and patience." He listened carefully, but the feeling of heaviness did not go away. "But what if inside I still feel prejudiced? What if I can't honestly say that I have gotten rid of what my father instilled in me? What should I do if I am afraid that I cannot become different?" The man replied, "We all come from the past, and it shapes our thoughts and beliefs. It's not what you feel that matters, it's what you do. Every day you can choose what kind of person you want to be. Admitting your weaknesses is not a defeat, but a step toward overcoming them." These words awakened something inside him. He realized that fearing his own prejudices was part of the path to change. Confronting inner demons is not a one-time act, but a daily effort. No one changes overnight, but each day offers an opportunity to choose a path. The couple invited him to join a new project, a reconciliation program where former racists and their victims could discuss their mistakes and work together to find a path to forgiveness. The project was not just a symbol of their shared struggle, but also a chance for him to truly test himself and his changes. At first, it was difficult. At every turn, he encountered people who had suffered the same injustice and contempt that had once come from him. He had to listen to pain and anger, and meet people who were not ready to forgive. But in these encounters, he began to find true redemption. In every conversation, in every word, he learned to admit his mistakes and, more importantly, to see in others the pain that he himself had once experienced. With each new step, he realized that change came from within, but required external action. He learned not to hide from his fears and prejudices, but to face them openly. It was through this process that he found what he feared most: true freedom from the past. Fast forward a few years, and his story has become an example of how even the deepest prejudices can be overcome if you are honest with yourself and keep moving forward. Now he is not just part of a reconciliation project, but one of its leaders. His work is an acknowledgement that change is possible if you are willing to be vulnerable and admit your mistakes. And although the fear of his own past did not disappear forever, he learned to live with it, realizing that true strength does not lie in denying one's weaknesses, but in the willingness to work with them every day. As the months passed, the former restaurant owner became increasingly involved in the reconciliation project. The experience didn't just change the way he felt about himself, it became an important link in the lives of others. The programs he helped organize attracted more and more participants, and each new story of forgiveness and fighting hatred gave him hope that he was on the right path. One day, during one of the weekly meetings, a new man arrived at the center. He was withdrawn and tense, keeping to himself and avoiding conversation, but there was something familiar about his face, something that made the former owner stop and take a closer look. It was a man who used to frequent his restaurant. Flashes of the past came flooding back. This customer always came with his family, but they had one thing in common: their disdain for people of a different race. At the time, such customers only seemed to confirm the correctness of his views, and now here he was, at a center created to combat what they once supported. After the meeting ended, the owner approached him. The man met his gaze with surprise and even suspicion, but did not leave. Instead, he quietly said, "You are the owner of the restaurant, right?" "Yes, it's me," he replied, feeling a mixture of worry and curiosity rise in his chest. "I didn't expect to see you here," the man continued, "or myself, for that matter." The man stood there as everyone left, his gaze growing heavier, as if he was trying to say something but couldn't find the right words. Finally, after a long pause, he began, "You probably remember when I used to come to your restaurant with my family. We were the ones who silently supported the way you ran your business. It seemed like everything was right, but after that incident with the black couple, something changed in me. I saw how everything fell apart. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, but over time, I realized that it wasn't that. It was that we were living our lives wrong, and I was a part of it." The words hit deeper than the former restaurateur had expected. It was the first time he had heard such confessions from someone who also shared the same old ideology. This person, like him, had gone through his own realization and had encountered the destructive power of prejudice. "I lost my family," the man said suddenly, his voice shaking. They didn't understand why I decided to rethink all this. We stopped communicating. I can't blame them, because I raised them like that. And then, when I decided to change, I found I had nowhere to go back to. This admission left the former owner frozen. He realized that the path to redemption might be even harder than he thought. He had lost his business, his reputation, and his respect. But this man had lost even more, his family, his connection to those he loved, because he had decided to go against his established beliefs. I'm here because I don't know where else to go, the man finished, and I don't know if I can find my way back. These words made the former restaurateur think about his own path. After all, he, too, almost lost himself in this struggle, and more than once wondered whether it was worth going against all the beliefs that permeated his world. But he knew that true change begins with pain and struggle. "You've already taken the first step," he said, feeling like his words had weight in that moment. "You're here, and that means you want to change not just your past, but your future. We have many stories like that here, and you're not alone." The man looked at him with relief. As if for the first time in a long time he had found someone who could understand his pain. This was the beginning of something bigger. From that day on, they began to meet regularly, discussing the past, mistakes and fears that they both carried within themselves. They helped each other overcome internal barriers. The restaurant owner saw in the man a reflection of himself, as he had been several years ago, and realized that this was a path that they had to walk together. Then one day, a few months after their first meeting, the man stood up in front of everyone in a meeting and shared his story, openly admitting his mistakes for the first time. It was a powerful moment for everyone listening, but especially for the former restaurant owner. He realized that their journey was not just about personal redemption, but an important part of a larger fight for justice. On that day, he realized that change begins with each of us, and even the deepest wounds can heal if you have the courage to face them. It had been several months since the former restaurant owner and his new acquaintance, a former supporter of racist ideology, had begun working together on a reconciliation project. They had formed a strong bond and had become not only colleagues but also friends, supporting each other as they worked through their own internal conflicts. But, as often happens in life, the real test was yet to come. One day, during a regular meeting at the community center, the former owner noticed that more and more participants were showing interest in their project, attracting public attention. Among the new faces was a young journalist who seemed interested in their story. At first, this seemed like a good thing, but soon, when the journalist began asking too deep and sometimes provocative questions, the atmosphere became tense. The former owner, already on the edge of emotional exhaustion, felt he couldn't cope with the situation. With each question from the journalist, he felt his efforts were increasingly threatened. He tried to answer honestly, but anxiety and fear of public condemnation were troubling him. One cold winter day, a local newspaper ran a story with a headline that summed up his fears: "Former racist or redeemed? The story of a restaurant owner and his journey to forgiveness." The story was written with a clear sensationalist bent, using his personal transformation as a focal point but also highlighting unresolvable contradictions and past mistakes. There was much truth in the story, but also much exaggeration about his internal struggles and process of reconciliation. When the former owner read the article, his feelings were mixed. Bitterness, fear, and anger overwhelmed him. But the most damaging thing was not the article itself, but how it was received by the public. Comments soon began to appear accusing him of hypocrisy and manipulation, and his redemption was perceived as an attempt to exploit his personal tragedy for personal gain. The trust he had worked hard to build over the years began to crumble. His colleagues at the community center noticed his crisis and tried to support him, but it didn't seem enough. And then, when everything around him seemed not as it should be, he noticed that his old acquaintance, the very person who came to the center seeking reconciliation, had disappeared. It was strange and disturbing, especially after their connection had become so meaningful and important. A few days passed and the former owner decided to look for him. He found the address that was listed in the center's documents and went there. When he got to the building, he felt a growing sense of unease. When he entered the apartment, he found it empty and his personal belongings missing. The only thing left was a letter on the table. He picked it up and unfolded it, reading, "You know how hard it was for me to accept my path. I thought that we could overcome our inner demons together, but I was too weak. I can't take the pressure and judgment anymore. I decided to go back to my old life. I'm sorry I left you. I just couldn't cope." This letter was the final blow. The former owner, feeling betrayed and abandoned, knew that he himself was on the verge of collapse. How could he continue the struggle when his colleague and support had disappeared and public opinion continued to deteriorate? He felt that his own efforts were facing insurmountable difficulties. During this time, his relationships with those around him worsened. Local media continued to spread rumors, and even those who initially supported him began to doubt the sincerity of his intentions. Every day brought new challenges, attacks on social media, negative articles, and even threats. One frosty morning, as he sat alone in his office, his lawyer called. "We have serious problems," she said. "We have received a lawsuit from several people who claim that their emotional suffering and moral damages from your past actions have not been compensated. They want to sue your center for malpractice." That moment was the culmination of everything that had been happening to him in recent months. He was on the edge, and it seemed like everything he had worked for was once again at risk. But in the chaos and pain, he found unexpected support. His former colleague, a couple who had also been through hard times, had reconnected. They saw his desperation and offered the help and support he needed. "We won't leave you," said the woman and the couple. "We understand that you're going through a difficult time. Let's get through this together. Don't forget that this center has become a symbol of change for many people. We have to fight for it and for ourselves." This offer was like a light at the end of the tunnel. With the help of his old team, the former owner was able to focus on solving the legal problems, and they began to look for ways to resolve the conflicts and improve the reputation of the center. During difficult times, he also found inner resources to regain his strength and determination. He became actively involved in the center again, helping to develop new programs and attending meetings where he shared his story with greater sincerity. He understood that redemption and change are a process that requires constant work and never ends. But as he moved forward, he felt supported by both those who stayed with him and those who returned with a sincere desire to help. It was hard and difficult, but eventually he realized that true strength does not come from avoiding difficulties, but from embracing them and moving forward. Overcoming prejudice, reconciliation, and true forgiveness became important aspects of his life, and he now knew that every day could be a new beginning. And when it came time to deal with lawsuits and public condemnation, he did so with renewed strength and wisdom, knowing that the path he was on was one of real change. Despite his efforts to restore his reputation and his commitment to the project, life continued to throw up new challenges. It seemed that internal and external problems did not allow him to rest. The former restaurant owner, now working at the Reconciliation Center, had become accustomed to constant difficulties, but the following events became a real test for him. One ordinary working day, as he was preparing for a meeting to organize a new event for the center, his phone suddenly rang. The name of a lawyer appeared on the screen, and he intuitively felt that this was not good news. "We have a problem," the lawyer said in a somber tone. "We've been sued, and this time it looks serious, not just for moral damages, but for alleged mismanagement of the fund. The paperwork looks substantial, and they want us to account for every expense we've made in the last 2 years." The words came as a bolt from the blue. He had somehow managed to cope with previous lawsuits and public attacks, but now the question was not only about his reputation, but also about his finances. Was his center really so mismanaged, or was someone trying to exploit the situation for their own gain? Despite his concerns, the former owner knew he had to act fast. He assembled a team and began reviewing all financial records. As the hours ticked by, the situation grew more bleak. He soon discovered several unclear transactions and improperly filed documents. These may have been errors, but they created a plausible basis for the charges. When the team completed the preliminary audit, it became clear that some of the statements could indeed raise suspicions. Realizing that the issue concerned not only his personal reputation but also the entire center, he decided to seek help from old friends and supporters who had once supported him, hoping that they would help resolve the situation. At this point, public attention shifted back to his center. The media began to hype the scandal, and the number of negative reviews and publications on the internet increased significantly. All he could do was organize a press conference to clarify the situation. At a press conference, he frankly admitted that there were problems in the management of the fund, but emphasized that this was not a deliberate violation. He explained that the errors were the result of misunderstandings and incompetence, not selfish motives. At the same time, he expressed his readiness to cooperate with the investigating authorities and do everything possible to correct the situation. Some journalists were skeptical, but many appreciated his honesty and openness. The former owner's actions began to be perceived not as an attempt at manipulation, but as a sincere desire to correct his mistakes. As a result, despite the tension and negative publications, public opinion became more balanced. At this point, his old acquaintances, including those who had helped him with the project, decided to get active. They organized a fundraising campaign to cover legal costs and help reorganize the foundation. Their support was critical and allowed not only to continue the center's work, but also to begin reviewing its financial practices. Eventually, thanks to the efforts of all parties, many of the charges were dropped and settlements were negotiated with those who had filed the lawsuits. The center was able to continue to exist, but it was now under increased scrutiny and all processes were reviewed and streamlined. The former restaurant owner emerged from the crisis with new clarity. He realized that mistakes can happen even with the best intentions, and the most important thing is not to try to avoid the consequences, but to learn from them and move forward. His story of change is now even more realistic and multifaceted, showing that redemption and change are a difficult and multi-step process. Over time, the Reconciliation Center regained its credibility and was able to focus on its mission again. It continued to work on projects aimed at unity and understanding, and became not only an example of personal transformation, but also a symbol of how to overcome difficulties and find ways to mend even when all seems lost. Soon after the former restaurant owner had overcome his crisis, his life and work at the Reconciliation Center began to improve again. However, the real test and an unusual turning point in his life came unexpectedly, when an offer came to the center that changed everything. One evening, as he was sitting in his office reviewing reports, a young guy with an unusually serious expression walked into his office. It was Jason, a young and ambitious entrepreneur who had recently launched his own social technology startup. He explained that his company had developed a unique online discussion platform aimed at reducing conflict and facilitating constructive dialogues. "Your work at the center has inspired me," Jason said. "We created this platform to facilitate honest and productive interactions. I want to offer you a partnership. We can integrate your reconciliation program with our platform to give people the opportunity to engage in dialogue and resolve conflicts in real time." The offer wasn't just enticing, it was potentially revolutionary. Jason's platform could be a powerful tool for expanding their work, allowing people to not only discuss their disagreements but also learn from each other's experiences. It also offered the hope of rebuilding their reputation and attracting new members. After several meetings and discussions, the terms of cooperation were finally agreed upon. The Reconciliation Center began using Jason's platform, which was a big step forward. Now, instead of simply discussing conflicts in closed groups, participants could join live sessions and discussions, share their stories and experiences, and receive help from experts in real time. However, with the new project came new challenges. The platform turned out to be much more complex to manage than expected, and technical glitches began to occur, leading to dissatisfaction among users. One day, during an important online discussion event, a glitch occurred, causing key data and important discussions to be lost. As a result, negative reviews of the platform appeared on social media, causing a serious blow to the reputation of the center and Jason's company. Realizing that the situation required immediate attention, the former restaurant owner assembled a team and, together with Jason, began working to fix the problems. They brought in technicians to fix the glitches and increased communication with users, explaining the situation and offering compensation for the inconvenience. At this time, the center organized a special event to reassure the public and demonstrate its commitment to quality and transparency. It was decided to hold an open webinar, where participants could ask questions directly and receive answers from experts and platform developers. During the webinar, the former owner spoke openly about the problems the center had encountered and explained that the steps taken were aimed at improving the platform. Jason also gave a detailed report on the technical issues and plans to fix them. The honesty and openness of their approach, as well as their determination to fix the mistakes, helped restore trust. Gradually, thanks to the team's coordinated work and efforts, technical issues were eliminated and the platform became more reliable. Improvement work continued, and users began to notice positive changes. As a result of this testing phase, the Reconciliation Center not only strengthened its position in the public consciousness, but also became a symbol of how honesty, openness, and determination can help overcome difficulties and build something truly meaningful. Collaboration with Jason's platform opened up new opportunities to expand their work and gave hope for the future. And although the path was thorny, the former restaurant owner and his team found inspiration in their business again, realizing that real change is possible not only through overcoming conflicts, but also through continuous improvement and adaptation to new challenges. Although the former restaurant owner and his team were able to overcome temporary technical difficulties and restore confidence in the platform, dark clouds once again loomed over their project when a series of dramatic events began that cast doubt on all their efforts. One rainy evening, when everyone was preparing for an important presentation of the new version of the platform, the former owner received an alarming call from Jason. There was desperation and panic in his voice. "You need to come to me right away," Jason said. "We're in a very serious situation." When the former owner arrived at Jason's office, he saw that he looked dejected. Jason managed to gather his thoughts and explain the situation. It turned out that they had been victims of a data leak, due to an internal conflict with one of the developers who had been fired a few days earlier. Confidential data of the platform's users had been stolen and leaked online. This included personal information, discussions that were supposed to remain confidential, and even some important details about the center's ongoing projects. "Not only have we lost the trust of our users, but we have also been exposed to legal risks," Jason said. "And that's not all. Some of the data has already been used for smear campaigns against us. We are facing serious financial and reputational damage." The news came as a blow to the head. The data leak was a serious blow to the reputation of their project, and its consequences were unpredictable. The Reconciliation Center found itself at the center of a scandal, and the media and public attention turned to them again, but now with a much more aggressive approach. For the former owner, this was a difficult test, as he had already dealt with negative reviews and doubts about his sincerity. Now the situation seemed not only problematic, but almost catastrophic. One evening, as he was returning home after a long day, frustrated and tired, he noticed that his house had been covered with threatening and slanderous papers. It was a strange and frightening reminder of how far his opponents would go. In addition, his old acquaintances began to distance themselves from him, fearing the negative impact on their reputations. The night became even more disturbing when the former owner received a threatening message from an anonymous source demanding that he stop working with the platform. The person claimed to have evidence of a large-scale fraud in the project and threatened to reveal this information if their demands were not met. Realizing that the situation requires immediate attention, the former owner and Jason decide to bring in cybersecurity experts and lawyers to help sort out what happened. Meanwhile, they also set up a meeting with the center's team and key stakeholders to discuss next steps and strategies for managing the crisis. Cyber experts found that the information posted online was partially faked, and the incident itself was planned to undermine trust in their project. In addition, they found that the anonymous message came from an IP address that was previously associated with a conflict that occurred at Jason's company. It seems that revenge from a former employee was a key factor. Despite their efforts, the crisis continued to escalate. The scandal spread across social media, and public attention once again focused on their failure. People who had once supported the center began to renege on their promises and investments. At this time, in one of the darkest moments, when all seemed lost, an unexpected ally appeared on the horizon. It was one of the main consumer protection organizations that took on the task of investigating the incident and supporting the center in a difficult situation. They helped organize public discussions and provided legal support. The drama of the situation reached its climax when evidence of the former employee's manipulations was presented at a court hearing. The court ruled in their favor, but the consequences of the data leak still left a serious mark on the project's reputation. However, despite the enormous difficulties, the former owner and Jason did not give up. They continued to work on rebuilding trust by actively developing new platform features and improving data security. They also opened new channels of communication with users and informed them in detail about the measures taken to prevent similar incidents in the future. Over time, the reconstruction efforts bore fruit. Public opinion gradually began to change. and the center was able to return to its core mission of promoting constructive dialogue and reconciliation. Although the path was difficult and full of dramatic turns, it became even more meaningful and showed how important it is to continue to fight for your ideals even in the most difficult circumstances. The former owner and Jason realized that their journey was not only a personal story of transformation, but also a lesson for anyone who faces adversity. It is important not only to overcome crises, but also to learn from them to become stronger and wiser. Despite all the efforts to restore trust and reputation, when it seemed that the difficulties were gradually receding, the situation took an unexpected turn. One evening, when the former owner and Jason were holding a planning meeting to prepare for the next big event, a sharp crack was heard in their office. It turned out that the company's email had been hacked. Anonymous messages with threats and revelations began appearing on computer screens. "This isn't just a cyber attack," Jason said, looking at the screen, his expression grim. "This is something more serious. These messages contain information we haven't even released." The study found that the messages not only threatened to expose damaging information, but also contained details that could impact existing business relationships and potential investments. The information the hackers exposed was not only about ongoing projects, but also about discussions that were taking place behind closed doors. As the team struggled to cope with the aftermath of the hack, an unexpected person showed up in the office, a former employee who had left at the start of the crisis, supposedly leaving all his troubles behind. His name was Edward. He brought with him a new proposal that seemed like it could change everything. "I know you're going through a tough time," Edward said as he walked into the office with paperwork and a laptop, "but I have information that might help you." He opened his laptop and showed documents that he said could lead to the source of the attack. These documents contained details of an internal investigation and data that he claimed could reveal not only the perpetrators but also the hidden motives behind the attack. "I know my actions have been misunderstood in the past," Edward continued, "but I didn't want you to get into this situation. I realized that perhaps someone previously associated with the project was using this situation for their own purposes. These documents may help you understand who is really behind the attacks." At first, the team was skeptical of his proposal, especially after previous intrigues and disappointments, but they soon realized that Edward's actions might be the only chance to unravel the complex web of deception and manipulation that may have been going on in their circle. As the former owner and Jason analyzed the documents, an unexpected and shocking fact emerged. One of their key team members, initially seemingly loyal and trustworthy, was linked to the perpetrators of the attack. This person, the director of marketing, used his position to manipulate and create a crisis in order to gain control over important projects and resources. An urgent internal investigation was launched after this information was discovered. It turned out that the CMO had been negotiating with competitors, passing on confidential information to them in order to discredit the project and eliminate competitors. His actions led to the emergence of false data and attacks on the platform, which jeopardized everything that had been achieved. Soon, thanks to joint work with law enforcement and cybersecurity specialists, it was possible to confirm all the evidence and eliminate the threat. Competitors who exploited the situation for their own purposes were held accountable, and the internal director was fired and a criminal case was initiated against him. Although the situation was extremely tense and difficult, this discovery allowed the former owner and Jason to restore their reputation and regain the trust of their users. They conducted additional security checks and strengthened internal controls to prevent similar situations from happening again. Edward's unexpected intervention, albeit with a delayed effect, played an important role in resolving the crisis. It also led to significant changes in their organization and strategy. The team learned that even in the most difficult moments, they must remain open to unexpected solutions and help, and use every chance to correct mistakes. Over time, the Reconciliation Center was able not only to restore its position, but also to strengthen it, continuing to develop new initiatives and projects. The story of the former owner and his team became an example of how even in the most difficult situations, a way out can be found if you act with determination and openness. Ultimately, they learned from each challenge and continued their work, striving to make the world a better place every day, despite all the obstacles and difficulties. With the crisis largely over, the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform began to rebuild. However, in the depths of the night, when all seemed calm, a new, even more unexpected turn occurred. One night, in the middle of the night, when the offices were empty, The team at the center received an anonymous message pointing to a cache in an abandoned warehouse outside the city. The message said that the location held the keys to solving the entire chain of events that had nearly destroyed their project. There was only one question left. Why would someone be so insistent on them finding these keys? As they approached the warehouse, the anxiety only grew. As soon as they entered the abandoned building, a suspicious man dressed in a black jacket and mask approached them. He silently handed them a box and immediately disappeared into the shadows. Inside the box were old documents, notes and photographs that clearly pointed to long-forgotten details related to previous projects and negotiations. In addition, there was also a USB drive with encrypted files. After hours of work decrypting the files on the USB drive, the team discovered a bombshell. The files contained details of a setup that had been in place long before the crisis. It was clear that someone inside the company, perhaps even someone previously associated with the project, had orchestrated a covert operation to manipulate public opinion and launch cyber attacks to further their own interests. The information showed that behind the manipulations was a group of investors who, unhappy with the projects beginning to take a more independent stance and move away from their interests, sought to eliminate competitive threats. They worked through front men and internal manipulation to create artificial crises and cause the organization to collapse from within. The most shocking discovery was that among the organizers of these manipulations was a man who had once been a close friend of the former owner. This man not only played a key role in organizing the crisis, but also collected compromising information to use for his own purposes. Realizing that this information could be the key to ending the story, the former owner and Jason decided to organize a strategic press conference where they intended to reveal all the revelations. At this time, they also began working with legal authorities and law enforcement to prepare for the prosecution of those responsible. The press conference was scheduled for a day when the world was focused on the current public and business debate. Everyone was expecting the former owner and Jason to present new data, but when they started talking, an unexpected turn occurred. As they were revealing the manipulations, an alarm suddenly sounded in the room and the doors were locked. It soon became clear that this was an attempt to prevent the information from being revealed. Panicked cries were heard in the room and a video recording appeared on the screen with threats from the very people who were in cahoots. They demanded that the conference be stopped immediately and threatened to release even more incriminating information if their demands were not met. The situation was tense and critical. The former owner and Jason, realizing that they could not stop the conference and let their enemies win, decided to ask the police for help. They managed to transmit a message through hidden communication channels, and soon law enforcement agencies appeared in the hall. With the help of the police and security services, it was possible to free the hall, detain those who tried to prevent the disclosure of information, and ensure the safety of the participants. The press conference continued, and the public learned the full truth about the manipulations and insidious plans. Soon after, there were arrests, lawsuits, and a massive cleanup that affected not only the organization but the entire network of people who tried to destroy the project. The former owner and Jason were able to prove their case, and the restoration of their reputation continued. While all this was happening, the main goal of the Reconciliation Center remained the same: to help people find common ground and build bridges between different communities. This crisis, although dramatic and difficult, was an important lesson in the importance of staying committed to your ideals and fighting for the truth, even when all seems lost. Ultimately, the former owner and Jason were able to bring peace and stability back to the Reconciliation Center. Their story, full of unexpected twists and dramatic events, became a reminder of the resilience and determination it takes to overcome the most difficult challenges. When the situation at the Reconciliation Center and on Jason's platform stabilized after the press conference, and it seemed that the crisis had subsided, they were faced with a new, unexpected challenge. The dramatic events that had occurred had left a deep mark not only on their professional lives, but also on their personal relationships. At this time, their project attracted the attention of not only the media, but also influential people and organizations, who began to give their assessment of their activities. Amidst the news of the project's recovery and success, an article appeared in a well-known international publication that, at first glance, seemed to be a simple promotional article, but in fact contained alarming signals. The article alleged that the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform were involved in a secret scheme to manipulate public opinion, aimed at hiding some darker truths. The former owner and Jason were stunned by the accusation, After a detailed analysis of the article and related sources, they realized that the article may have been the result of a continuing campaign to discredit their work by unknown adversaries. It turned out that an international organization was behind the publication, which had a hidden interest in destroying their reputation. As they dug deeper into the investigation, it became clear that at the center of the story was a global network of lobbyists and investors who were using the crisis to manipulate public opinion and increase their own financial gains. These forces were connected to companies and governments that were unhappy with the way the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform were questioning their actions and policies. One of the most shocking revelations was that one of the former owner's old acquaintances, who had previously been a close friend, was now working for this international organization. This person, as it turned out, was the main ideologist of the entire disinformation and manipulation campaign aimed at destroying the reputation of the center and the platform. As they continued to work to expose these dark forces, an unexpected ally appeared on the horizon. That ally was a leading international human rights organization that had long been monitoring the Reconciliation Center's activities and was impressed by their tenacity and resilience. The organization offered to help counter the international manipulation network by providing legal and informational support. They also began a joint investigation that soon led to the uncovering of not only the plans and manipulations, but also the exposure of a large-scale high-level corruption scheme. In the wake of these events, international investigations and prosecutions of those involved in the smear campaign began. Some high-profile figures behind the scheme began to be prosecuted and accused of corruption and manipulation. This attracted public attention and forced many aspects related to political and business interests to be reconsidered. Amidst the challenges of a new international scandal, the former owner and Jason continued to strengthen the work of the Reconciliation Center and platform. They used this crisis as an opportunity to grow, improving their work and attracting new supporters. Working on projects aimed at unity and understanding, they became symbols of resilience and honesty in difficult circumstances. Ultimately, despite all the trials and dramatic twists and turns, the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform were able to restore and strengthen their reputation, continuing their mission to promote constructive dialogue and conflict resolution. They became an example of how to overcome the most difficult challenges, when you need to fight for the truth and remain committed to your ideals, even when everything around you is falling apart. After international scandal and revelations, the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform began to rebuild. However, the new beginning was not as simple as expected. Rising from the ashes, they faced an unexpected threat as their project began to attract attention again. New, even more mysterious forces appeared on the horizon that threatened to destroy everything they had built. One evening, the former owner and Jason received a strange message left on their office door. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with an image of an old key and the address of an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The letter was anonymous, but its contents and mysterious design aroused suspicion. When they arrived at the designated location, they were met by a huge, half-abandoned mansion that looked like a set from a thriller. Regular searches in buildings often end in disappointment, but this time they found something unusual. Inside the mansion, in one of the abandoned rooms, they found a safe. The key indicated in the letter fit the lock perfectly. When they opened the safe, they found a folder of documents and an electronic storage device. The documents contained detailed plans for an even more complex and large-scale manipulation that was aimed at undermining the credibility of the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform. These plans included new strategies of disinformation, blackmail, and even frame-ups, the purpose of which was to completely destroy the reputation of their organization. But the most shocking revelation was that these plans were linked to a project run by the same international human rights organization that had previously supported them. Documents showed that it had been manipulated by the same forces that were trying to destroy their project. It turned out that behind the organization's support there were hidden interests and perhaps even corrupt connections. Realizing that they were now not only dealing with external threats, but also possible backstabbing within their own circle of allies, the former owner and Jason decided to tread carefully. They immediately set about unraveling the new threat, turning to the most trusted partners and friends they could trust for help. At this point, one of their trusted employees, a security analyst named Lena, brought them some disturbing news. the human rights organization was in the midst of an internal crisis caused by the revelation. Lena discovered that activists within the organization were beginning to suspect interference and corruption. Soon, a group of activists opposed to internal sabotage contacted them and offered to help with the investigation. Joining forces with these activists, the former owner and Jason launched a new investigation that revealed that the betrayal within the human rights organization was part of a larger scheme of manipulation involving powerful individuals seeking to maintain their position and influence on the international stage. As more details emerged, they also discovered that behind it all was a mysterious figure known only by the alias Shadow Master. This man was a master manipulator who controlled a complex web of connections and operations. Information about the Shadow Master became key to understanding the entire situation and further planning. With the help of activists, the former owner and Jason set a trap for the Shadow Master using a specially prepared public action that attracted the attention of the international media. They prepared an expose that exposed the actions of the Shadow Master and his hidden manipulations. The action led to a shocking result. The revelations caused an international scandal, and the Shadow Master was tracked down and detained. In the end, the human rights organization was cleansed of its corrupt elements and its reputation was restored. The Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform were able to continue their work, receiving a new wave of support and recognition. Not only did they overcome previous crises, but they were also able to strengthen their position, expanding their influence on the international stage. The story of the fight against betrayal and manipulation became a symbol of perseverance and determination. As a result, they were able to prove that, despite all the difficulties and intrigues, true commitment to one's ideals and the desire for truth can overcome any obstacles. After successfully exposing the Shadow Master and restoring the reputation of the Reconciliation Center, it seemed that the former owner and Jason could finally relax and focus on developing their project. However, the peaceful atmosphere was only a temporary lull before a new, more unexpected test. One day, a strange call came from an unknown number in the office of the Reconciliation Center. On the other end of the line was a voice that was barely recognizable, but which immediately raised alarm. It was a man who called himself the Observer. "You thought that exposing the Master of Shadows was the end of your struggle?" said a cold voice. "This is only the beginning. Your work has attracted the attention of more than just those who seek to undermine your reputation. You are now at the center of a much more complex game." Suddenly, the office was thrown into chaos. Images appeared on the computer screens, revealing details of a new threat. Not only were they targeted by the remaining followers of the Master of Shadows, but they had also accidentally come into conflict with an international criminal organization involved in counterfeiting and trading confidential information. As the investigation continued, they discovered that their project and activities had attracted the attention of more than just cyber criminals, but a complex network of criminal groups involved in information manipulation and government influence. These groups were using data and false documents to sow discord and chaos in different countries. The most shocking revelation was that the criminal network was linked to an international political figure who used his power to manipulate public opinion and strengthen his own influence. This politician, known for his high-profile cases and scandals, was linked to several recent events and attacks on the Reconciliation Center. Suddenly, in the midst of the crisis, the former owner and Jason received a letter from an informant who claimed to have evidence of the criminal organization's plans. The informant offered to hand over this evidence in exchange for protection and anonymity. The letter included a meeting in a mysterious location that seemed risky, but the need to expose the real enemy outweighed the fear. On the appointed evening, they arrived at the specified address, which turned out to be an old industrial building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, they were met by a man in the shadows, who handed them several flash drives with encrypted information. However, before they could discuss anything, unknown persons suddenly attacked the building, and they had to flee. That night, when they were able to safely return to the office, another surprise awaited them. A video message appeared on all the screens. In it, a politician with ties to a criminal network directly accused the Reconciliation Center of trying to interfere in international affairs and manipulate public opinion, and threatened to reveal sensational but fake evidence against them. At this time, the former owner and Jason began to receive threats. Against the backdrop of pressure and threats, they began to feel that someone was trying to manipulate public opinion, creating the appearance that they themselves were involved in international scandals and spy games. In search of a way out, they turned to their most trusted allies, including human rights groups and international detectives who investigated corrupt politicians. Together, they were able to reveal that the politician had used false documents and manipulation to create a diversion and cover up his own crimes. The new operation to expose was carefully planned, with the help of international media, independent detectives and human rights groups. They organized a large-scale investigation that attracted public attention. The truth about the manipulations and falsifications was soon unearthed, and a huge scandal began in the international community. The politician was forced to resign and the criminal network that had manipulated the events was exposed and dismantled. The former owner and Jason, despite the hardships they had endured, were able to restore their reputation and continue their work, but they were now more aware of the global scale of the game they had been involved in. Ultimately, the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform became not only a symbol of the fight for truth and justice, but also an example of how even the darkest and most difficult challenges can be overcome with determination, honesty, and resilience. After uncovering an international crime ring and exposing a corrupt politician, the former owner and Jason regained their peace and began planning the future of the Reconciliation Center. However, their peace was short-lived. One night, an unusual call came into the center's office. A mysterious video appeared on the computer screen with an anonymous message. The video showed a man in the shadows who looked worried. "You thought you could relax after all this?" he said. "This is just the beginning. You have gotten yourself into something much bigger and more dangerous than you could have ever imagined. Your work has attracted the attention of those who will stop at nothing to protect their interests." The video revealed that the former owner and Jason's actions had inadvertently led to the discovery of information about a mysterious organization known only as the Cartel Order. This organization, with vast influence and resources, was involved in numerous international conspiracies and manipulations. Their goal was not only financial, but also political. They sought to control and manipulate global events to achieve their hidden goals. Shortly after receiving this message, something unusual happened in the center's office. A file was found that had been sent to their server from an unknown source. This file contained scanned documents and photographs indicating that the Cartel Order was using high-tech equipment for surveillance and sabotage. After reviewing the materials, it became clear that this conspiracy involved not only political figures, but also business leaders, media personalities, and even high-profile technology experts. They created a complex web of manipulation and espionage operations to maintain their power and influence. Realizing that it would be extremely difficult to confront such a powerful organization, the former owner and Jason decided to seek help from their old allies, including human rights groups, independent investigators, and international media. They began to formulate a strategy to expose the order of the cartel and neutralize its influence. Against this backdrop, strange things began to happen in their office. Their electronic devices began to experience strange glitches and attacks, and Jason's important data and documents disappeared. The former owner and Jason felt that someone was watching their every move. Soon, as part of their investigation, they received information about a mysterious man known as Grey Wolf, who was allegedly a key figure in the order of the cartel and was behind the organization of their espionage operations. Legends about Grey Wolf described him as a master manipulator and a dangerous criminal who used his skills to control and suppress any threats to his interests. As their investigation progressed, they discovered that Grey Wolf was planning to use cutting-edge technology to manipulate and influence major political events. They learned of plans that involved rigging and manipulating elections in several countries, which could lead to a global political crisis. During one of the night raids, when the former owner and Jason were trying to find out more information about the plans of the Grey Wolf, they encountered an unexpected ally, a mysterious woman who introduced herself as Irina. Irina was a former member of the Cartel Order who had escaped and now wanted to help expose the criminal activities of her former employer. She gave them access to classified data and materials that could be the key to exposing the entire organization. Realizing that time was running out and the threats were real, the former owner and Jason launched an emergency operation to expose the order of the cartel. Their plan included coordinating with international agencies and media outlets to publish evidence of manipulation and criminal activity before the Grey Wolf could carry out his plans. But when they were ready for the final publication, something unexpected happened. Their publication was immediately blocked, and the documents and evidence disappeared. It seems that the Grey Wolf was able to anticipate their plan and block the leak of information. Now the former owner and Jason must act quickly and effectively. They must find a way to uncover the truth and prevent a global crisis without access to key information. It's a fight to the brink of survival, where every action they take can change the course of history. The former owner and Jason, faced with an unprecedented threat, realized that they must now use unconventional methods to uncover the truth and stop the cartel order. Their plan was this: if official channels could not help, they would use unofficial but effective ways to spread information. The first step was to create secure, covert channels for communication and information transfer. They used old contacts and turned to independent journalists and activists they could trust. With the help of Irina, their new ally, they gained access to internal resources and technologies that allowed them to bypass blockages and data protection. In parallel, they decided to conduct a public action that would attract international attention to their investigation. They organized a large press conference to which they invited both international media and independent research groups. In order to ensure that their messages would not be blocked, they used encrypted communication channels and distributed evidence through several independent platforms and anonymous networks. When the day of the press conference arrived, the former owner and Jason were ready to present compelling evidence of the manipulation and criminal activities of the Order of the Cartel. Despite complex technical obstacles and threats, they were able to demonstrate irrefutable evidence that the Order of the Cartel was behind multiple international crises, including election manipulation and high-level corruption. The conference attracted enormous attention and created a wave of international reaction. Media outlets around the world began actively covering the story, and international agencies, including Interpol and Europol, began investigating. In the wake of this revelation, Grey Wolf and the key figures of the Order of the Cartel began to panic. They attempted to hide in unknown locations, but thanks to the efforts of the former owner and Jason, as well as international law enforcement, the key leaders of the criminal organization were arrested within weeks. Soon after the arrests and trials began, it became clear that the influence of the Order of the Cartel was far more widespread than anyone had imagined. Their manipulations spanned multiple countries and industries, and the consequences of their actions were more serious than anyone could have expected. The former owner and Jason, despite the ordeal, were able to return to their work with renewed strength and determination. The Reconciliation Center continued its work, now with even greater support and respect from the international community. They used the lessons and resources they learned to improve their work, ensuring a greater emphasis on transparency and integrity. Irina, their mysterious ally, decided to start a new life away from the criminal world and offered her assistance as a security and management consultant. She helped strengthen the center's defenses and the platform to ensure they were safe from future threats. Ultimately, the former owner and Jason became heroes who overcame enormous odds and managed to uncover a complex conspiracy. They proved that the power of truth and perseverance can defeat even the most powerful and secretive forces. Their story became an inspiration to many, showing that honesty and determination can change the world despite all obstacles. Now, the Reconciliation Center and Jason's platform have continued their work, not only to resolve ongoing conflicts but also to strengthen global cooperation and understanding. Their work has taken on new significance, and they have become a symbol of hope and resilience in a world where truth and justice are often hard to find. This is the end of this wonderful story. I hope you liked it, and you were imbued with this atmosphere. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel as it promotes my video. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye everyone.